A retired police horse and a lonely old woman live on a remote farm, but when intruders threaten their peace, he does something no one could have imagined. The gentle morning breeze caressed the leaves of the golden maple tree, planted decades ago in the backyard of the ranch in Oakville. Sarah Thompson watched the dance of flowers in the wind through the window of her porch, her calloused hands resting on the wheels of her chair. The sun was still shy on the horizon, but she had been awake for hours, as always. Routine had been her safe harbor since the accident that left her wheelchair-bound, and she clung to it with the same strength with which she clung to life. The clock struck 6:30 when Thunder, her faithful equine companion, began his morning stroll through the pasture. The imposing horse, a veteran of the mounted police, carried in his posture the nobility of years of service. His hooves marked the damp earth with military precision, while his attentive eyes scanned every corner of the property. It was as if he knew that his mission was now even more important: to protect this woman who, even facing her limitations, remained as firm as the ancient trees that surrounded the ranch. "Good morning, my guardian," Sarah whispered, watching the animal complete its rounds. It was impressive how Thunder seemed to understand every nuance of her voice, every gesture of hers. Since her husband had passed away, the horse had become more than a pet. He was her silent confidant, her strength when her legs could no longer support her. The sound of a car approaching on the dirt road caught the attention of both. It was Jake, the young helper who appeared every morning to assist with the heavier tasks. His old blue Volkswagen Beetle kicked up dust wherever it went, announcing his arrival even before one could see his face. Sarah noticed something different. That morning, Thunder, usually calm, pricked up his ears in alert, his muscles visibly tensing under his shiny coat. "Mrs. Thompson, good morning." Jake waved, his wide smile contrasting with the serious expression he carried in his eyes. "I brought those seeds you asked for." As the young man unloaded the packages from the car, Sarah realized that something was out of place. The birds, which usually made a morning symphony, were strangely silent. The woods surrounding the property seemed denser, darker, as if they held secrets that shouldn't be revealed. "Jake," she called, adjusting herself in the chair, "have you noticed anything different around here in the last few days?" The young man paused for a moment, his hands hesitating over one of the boxes. "Different how, Mrs. Thompson?" "I'm not sure. It's as if—" She paused, searching for the right words. "As if someone were watching the ranch." Jake laughed, but the sound came out forced. "You're spending too much time alone here, Mrs. Thompson. That's not good for you. You need to distract yourself more, get out a bit." But Sarah knew her land as well as she knew the lines of her own hand. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just her imagination. The footprints she had found near the barn the week before didn't belong to any of the few visitors she received. And now, that disturbing silence. As Jake worked in the garden, Thunder maintained a calculated distance, his eyes never leaving the young man. The horse's behavior intrigued Sarah. In recent months, since Jake had started working at the ranch, Thunder had shown increasing restlessness in his presence. At the end of the afternoon, when the sun was beginning to say goodbye, Sarah found something that made her heart race. Tied to the gate with a twisted piece of wire was a note. The message was short, but loaded with threat. "Be careful who you trust." The stories that ran through the town about invasions of rural properties began to weigh on her mind. Oakville was no longer the same quiet town it had been years ago. Neighbors commented about gangs specializing in stealing machinery and cattle, but Sarah had always believed that her small ranch was protected by its simplicity. That night, while organizing some old documents in her office, her fingers found a folder yellowed by time. Inside it was a detailed plan of the property, drawn with the characteristic precision of her late husband. In the corner of the paper, a notation caught her attention. "Underground storage. Barn." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The dawn brought with it a dense fog that covered the ranch like a cloak of mystery. Sarah had barely slept, her reflections on the discovery of the old plan keeping her awake for most of the night. The underground storage mentioned by her husband was something completely new to her, a secret kept for years under her feet without her ever suspecting. Jake arrived earlier that morning, seeming especially anxious. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right? You look tired," he commented as he unloaded some tools from his car. "I didn't sleep very well, Jake," she replied, closely observing his reactions. "I found some old documents last night, plans of the property. Did you know there's an underground storage beneath the barn?" The young helper froze for an instant, almost imperceptibly, before forcing a laugh. "Storage? Never heard of it. You must be confusing it with something else. That barn has been there for years. If there was something underneath, someone would have found it by now." Thunder, who was grazing near the fence, abruptly raised his head at the sound of Jake's voice. The horse began to approach, his steps deliberate and tense. Sarah noticed how the animal's eyes never left the young man, as if ready to intervene at any moment. "Can you check for me?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual. "There must be some kind of entrance or trapdoor. My husband's notes were always very precise." "Not today, Mrs. Thompson," Jake responded quickly, checking his watch. "I have another appointment soon. I need to finish up here quickly." As soon as the young man left earlier than usual, Thunder began to act even more peculiarly. The horse headed to the barn and, to Sarah's surprise, began to stamp his hooves on the packed earth floor, as if trying to show something. "What do—" "You know that I don't, my friend," Sarah murmured, observing the animal's behavior. Determined, she maneuvered her wheelchair to the phone and dialed a familiar number. After a few rings, a deep voice answered. "Sergeant Miller." "Miller, it's Sarah. I need your help to check something here at the ranch. It's about an underground storage that my husband mentioned in some old plans. There's something strange going on around here." The sergeant, a longtime friend of the family, promised to appear that afternoon. While waiting, Sarah observed Thunder continue his investigation around the barn. The horse was now digging into the soil with determination, his powerful hooves, removing layers of compacted earth. It was then that something caught Sarah's attention. Among the soil turned over by Thunder, an object began to appear. With her heart racing, she called the animal, which obediently moved away. There, partially buried, was a modern backpack, completely out of place in that rural environment. The sound of a patrol car approaching announced the arrival of Sergeant Miller. The police officer, a robust man with graying hair at the temples, examined the discovery with growing concern. Inside the backpack, they found sophisticated equipment: a state-of-the-art radio communicator, powerful flashlights, and more disturbingly, a detailed map of the region with several neighboring properties marked. "This isn't amateur stuff, Sarah," said Miller, his expression serious. "This equipment is professional, expensive, and this map, someone is mapping the region with a specific purpose." The sergeant then shared information that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Decades ago, a criminal group led by a man known as Dr. Harrison used the region for their operations. They never managed to arrest him, and some said he was still around waiting for the right moment to resume his activities. "If they're using your ranch as an observation point, we need to be alert," warned Miller. "I'll increase patrols in the region and leave a squad car on standby. But you need to be careful, Sarah. Don't trust strangers and, most importantly, stay alert to any suspicious movement." As the sergeant prepared to leave, Thunder remained vigilant, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange hues that at another time would have seemed beautiful to Sarah. Now, however, the growing shadows only increased her apprehension. The night arrived, bringing with it heavy clouds that promised a strong storm. Sarah tried to keep calm while organizing her thoughts in the living room, the sound of the first thunders echoing in the distance. The day's discoveries, the backpack with modern equipment and Sergeant Miller's revelation about the mysterious Dr. Harrison, had left her mind in turmoil. Thunder remained restless in the stable, his occasional neighs sounding like alerts. In the growing darkness, Sarah knew the animal well enough to know that his behavior wasn't normal. It was as if he sensed something, an invisible threat hovering over the ranch. The phone rang, startling her. It was Margaret, her closest neighbor, who lived about half a mile away. "Sarah, did you see Jake today?" asked the neighbor, her voice laden with concern. "He was supposed to come fix my fence after leaving your place, but he didn't show up. I tried calling his cell phone, but it goes straight to voicemail." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. "He left here earlier than normal, Margaret. Said he had another commitment." Strange. He confirmed he was coming. It's not like him to miss. Without notice. After hanging up, Sarah rolled her chair to the window, watching the lightning that now illuminated the sky more frequently. The rain began to fall, first in sparse drops, soon transforming into a curtain of water that made it difficult to see beyond the porch. It was then that she noticed something different about the barn. For a brief moment, illuminated by the flash of lightning, she seemed to see a faint light coming from inside. Her heart raced. There was no electricity installed in that building. Thunder began to neigh more forcefully, his hooves beating against the stable floor in a frantic rhythm. Sarah knew she should call Sergeant Miller, but the storm had knocked out the phone signal. She was alone. Amidst the noise of the rain, another sound reached her ears, the unmistakable creak of the barn door opening. Sarah held her breath, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. The darkness outside was almost complete now, broken only by occasional lightning. The next sound was even more disturbing. Thunder had managed to open his stable door. The horse galloped across the muddy terrain, his majestic silhouette revealed with each flash in the sky. He positioned himself between the house and the barn, like an ancestral guardian protecting his territory. A muffled scream cut through the night, followed by the sound of falling metal. Something was happening in the barn. Sarah could see shadows, moving through the cracks in the boards, illuminated by artificial light. Whispered voices came in fragments, competing with the sound of the storm. "Can't be here. We have to take everything. He's going to—" The words were carried away by the wind, but the tone of urgency was clear. Thunder remained motionless, his ears pointed towards the barn, muscles tense under his coat wet from the rain. A new lightning revealed a scene that made Sarah hold her breath. The barn door opened completely, and a figure emerged running. It was Jake. The young man was carrying something in his arms, stumbling in the mud as he tried to reach his car parked near the property entrance. But he wasn't alone. Two other shadows followed him, their forms distorted by the rain and darkness. It was at this moment that Thunder sprang into action. The horse dashed towards the intruders, his heavy hooves marking the soaked earth with military precision. The first man fell trying to dodge, slipping in the mud. The second managed to reach the fence, but Thunder cornered him, forcing him to retreat towards the house. Jake, seeing his companions in trouble, dropped what he was carrying, a folder that opened as it hit the ground, scattering papers that soon began to disintegrate in the rain. Headlights cut through the darkness. "Sergeant, Miller's patrol car was entering the property, siren blaring and tearing through the silence of the night. Apparently, Margaret had noticed the strange movement and called the police. Freeze, police! The sergeant's strong voice echoed across the terrain. The intruders, already destabilized by Thunder's intervention, offered no resistance. Jake, however, managed to reach his car. The engine roared, tires skidding in the mud as he accelerated down the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness of the stormy night. Sarah watched everything from the window, her heart beating out of rhythm. As the police officers handcuffed the two captured men, Thunder returned to his sentinel position near the house as if knowing that his mission was not yet complete. The storm was beginning to subside, but the mystery surrounding her ranch only deepened. The sun had not yet risen when Sergeant Miller returned to the ranch, accompanied by an investigation team. The rain had left a trail of destruction across the terrain. Fallen branches, deep puddles, and soaked papers scattered near the barn. Sarah hadn't been able to sleep, her mind replaying the events of the previous night like a film on an infinite loop. "The men we arrested are known in the region," explained Miller, sitting at the kitchen table while holding a steaming cup of coffee. "They work for an organization that has been causing problems in several towns in the interior, but the interesting thing is that they're not the heads. They're just pawns." Sarah adjusted her wheelchair, moving closer to the table. "And Jake? Did you find him?" The sergeant shook his head negatively. "His car was found abandoned on the highway near the Hillsdale Junction. But there's something you need to know about him, Sarah. His real name isn't Jake, it's James Harrison, Jr." The cup Sarah was holding almost slipped from her hands. "Harrison? As in—" "Exactly," Miller confirmed, his expression serious. "He's Dr. Harrison's son. Apparently, he's following in his father's footsteps, but in a more sophisticated way. The equipment we found is state-of-the-art, used for monitoring and surveillance. Your ranch was being used as a base of operations. Through the kitchen window, they could see Thunder grazing peacefully, as if the previous night had been nothing but a nightmare. The horse occasionally raised his head, his attentive eyes sweeping the horizon with the discipline acquired in his years of service in the mounted police. "There's one more thing," continued Miller, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "The team found this in the underground storage of the barn. They're old photographs from the time when your husband was the sheriff in this region." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. The photographs, yellowed by time, showed her husband alongside other police officers, including a much younger Miller. But one photo in particular caught her attention. In it, her husband appeared next to an elegant man with a proud bearing and penetrating gaze. "This is Dr. Harrison," confirmed Miller, pointing to the figure. "Your husband was about to arrest him when he had the accident," Sarah completed, painful memories resurfacing in her mind. "But what does this have to do with what's happening now?" "The underground storage wasn't just a hideout, Sarah. It was part of a network of tunnels and bunkers, built decades ago. Your husband discovered this and was building a case against Dr. Harrison. The plan you found was part of the evidence." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the pieces of the puzzle fit together in her mind. "That's why James started working here. He was looking for something." "Exactly. And from what we found in the storage, he found it. There were documents, old records, everything that would incriminate not only his father but the entire organization. Documents that your husband had hidden before the accident." A sharp neigh from Thunder interrupted the conversation. The horse had positioned itself near the fence, its posture indicating maximum alert. A sleek black car passed slowly along the dirt road, its tinted windows preventing anyone from seeing who was inside. "It's him," Miller murmured, rising quickly. "Dr. Harrison always had that same car. He's provoking us, showing that he's still around." The vehicle continued its lazy path, like a panther studying its prey. Thunder maintained his position, following the car with attentive eyes until it disappeared around the bend in the road. "You're no longer safe here, Sarah," said Miller, his voice heavy with concern. "We need to get you off this ranch." But Sarah had already made her decision. "I'm not going anywhere, Miller. This land holds my husband's history, our history, and now I know that he wasn't just taking care of the property, he was protecting evidence, fighting for justice until the end." The sergeant knew that tone of voice. It was the same one his friend, the late sheriff, used when he was determined to solve a case. "Then we'll reinforce security. I'll leave a patrol car on standby and install surveillance cameras. But you have to promise me that you'll be careful." Sarah nodded, her eyes turning to Thunder, who was now returning to the pasture. "Don't worry. I have the best bodyguard anyone could ask for. He knew from the beginning that something was wrong. We just needed to pay more attention to the signs." The days that followed brought an apparent calm to the ranch. Sarah established a new routine, adapting to the constant presence of the police car discreetly parked near the gate. The security cameras installed by Miller blinked silently, their electronic eyes scanning every corner of the property. On a particularly hot morning, while watering her orchids on the porch, Sarah received an unexpected visit. Mary Henderson, her husband's former secretary at the sheriff's office, arrived driving her small red Chevy. "I came as soon as I heard," said the gray-haired lady, hugging Sarah tightly. "Miller told me about what happened, about Dr. Harrison's son." Sarah led her friend inside, offering freshly brewed coffee. Mary carried an old folder under her arm, her fingers drumming nervously on the worn leather. "There's something you need to see," said the former secretary after settling at the table. "I kept this all these years, waiting for the right moment. Your husband asked me to keep it safe in case something happened to him." The folder contained old documents, some yellowed by time, others still preserving the sharpness of typewritten ink. They were reports, testimonies, and more surprisingly, a series of letters exchanged between her husband and Dr. Harrison himself. They were college friends, revealed Mary, her voice heavy with regret. They studied together in Boston, dreamed of changing the world, but they followed very different paths. Sarah immersed herself in reading the letters, discovering a story she had never imagined. Her husband and Harrison had started their careers together, one in law enforcement, the other in law. At first, they collaborated on cases, sharing ideals of justice, but something changed. "It was when they discovered the first tunnel," continued Mary. "It was 1985 during a routine investigation. Your husband realized there was an entire network of underground passages connecting various properties in the region. Some dated back to the Prohibition era, others were more recent." Thunder, who was grazing near the porch, suddenly raised his head, his ears moving in alert. A distant engine sound caught everyone's attention. Through the window, they saw an unfamiliar pickup truck passing slowly along the road. "People keep passing by here," commented Sarah, watching the vehicle move away. "It's like they're studying." "The ranch." "It's not the ranch they want, Sarah," replied Mary, pulling more documents from the folder. "It's this." They were detailed plans, much more complete than the one Sarah had found days before. They showed not only the storage under the barn, but an entire network of tunnels that extended for miles, connecting strategic points in the region. "Your husband discovered that Harrison was using the old tunnels and building new ones. It wasn't just to hide goods. It was a complex system of escape routes, observation points, and hideouts. A true underground labyrinth." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as she noticed a specific marking on the plan. Right under her house, there was an indication of a secret compartment that wasn't on any other document. "Mary," she called, pointing to the marking, "do you know what's here?" The former secretary leaned over the paper, adjusting her glasses. "Your husband never told me about this specifically, but I remember something he mentioned weeks before the accident. He said he had found the definitive proof, something that would change everything." A sharp neigh from Thunder interrupted the conversation. The horse had taken a defensive position near the gate, its hooves nervously stomping the ground. For the second time that day, an unfamiliar vehicle passed along the road, this time a black car identical to Dr. Harrison's. "They know," Mary murmured, hastily gathering the documents. "They know I came here. I need to go, Sarah. It's not safe to stay in one place for too long." "Wait," Sarah asked, holding her friend's arm. "What exactly did my husband find? What was in that compartment?" Mary hesitated, her eyes alternating between Sarah and the window. "I'm not sure, but he mentioned something about a book." Thunder continued his symphony of alerts outside, probably keeping the intruders focused on the front of the house. Upon reaching the pantry, Sarah carefully closed the secret panel. Through the half-open door, she could see shadows moving in, the living room reflected by the intruders' flashlights. "The son is an idiot," Harrison's voice sounded closer. "How did he not find anything in all these months working here?" "He searched all the obvious places," another voice replied. "But you know the sheriff, and he would never do something obvious." A particularly loud neigh from Thunder was followed by the sound of sirens approaching. The shadows in the living room moved quickly towards the exit. "The widow must have some alarm system," Harrison cursed. "Come on, we can't be caught here." Sarah waited until she heard the sound of cars speeding away before leaving the pantry. Through the window, she saw Sergeant Miller's patrol car entering her property, lights flashing in the darkness. Thunder had positioned himself strategically, blocking the view of the pantry from anyone in front of the house. Once again, the animal had proven to be more than just a horse. He was a tireless guardian. As the patrol car lights illuminated the yard, Sarah felt the weight of the envelope in her pocket. Her husband had left one last message for her, and, now finally, she was ready to discover the whole truth. Sergeant Miller insisted on a full sweep of the property before leaving Sarah alone again. The intruders left no obvious traces besides some shoe marks on the porch. "Are you sure you don't want to go somewhere safer?" Miller asked for the third time. "My place is here," Sarah replied firmly, her hand unconsciously touching her jacket pocket with the envelope. After the police left, with Thunder standing guard, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment of privacy in her room. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. "My dear Sarah, if you're reading this letter, it means you found the secret compartment and probably know about my history with Edward Harrison. But there's much more you need to know. Our friendship began with shared ideals of justice, but Edward always had a distorted view of the world. For him, laws were just obstacles to be circumvented. At first, they were small deviations he justified, as necessary. But soon I realized I was witnessing the construction of something much larger and more dangerous. The tunnels I discovered weren't just hideouts. They were part of a network that extended throughout the state. Edward had transformed an old system of passages from the Prohibition era into something much more sophisticated. Businessmen, politicians, judges, many were involved, each with their role in this complex scheme. The book I left in the safe contains all the names, dates, and operations. It's information I collected over years, documenting every connection, every suspicious transaction. Edward doesn't know, but I have proof that he's just an intermediary. Above him, there are much more powerful people pulling the strings. Don't trust anyone who approaches the ranch with sudden interest. They never gave up looking for this information. If you're reading this, it's because they finally discovered the book exists. But you're not alone in this fight. I left specific instructions with trusted people. Mary is one of them. She knows only what's necessary for your protection. Miller is another. He was a rookie when we started this investigation, but he's always been honest. And there's someone else you can trust completely. Thunder. It's no coincidence he came to our ranch after his retirement from the mounted police. I chose him personally, trained him to protect you and the property. He knows every inch of this place and knows exactly what to do in case of danger. The secret compartment has another exit, leading to an older tunnel. On the wall opposite the safe, there's a panel similar to the one in the pantry. It opens the same way and leads to a passage that ends in the abandoned barn of the old Meadows farm, 2 miles from here. Use only in case of extreme emergency. I know it's a lot to process, my love. I always wanted to tell you everything, but I kept it secret for your protection. Now you have in your hands the power to expose the whole truth. But be cautious. These people are dangerous and will do anything to keep their secrets buried. A record of everyone involved, all the operations from the beginning. The kind of thing that could bring down not just Dr. Harrison, but much more powerful people. As she watched her friend leave hastily, Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the old plans. There, hidden somewhere beneath her feet, was a secret capable of changing everything. Her husband had protected that information with his own life, and now she understood the real reason why so many people were interested in her small ranch. Thunder approached the porch, his attentive eyes fixed on the road where the black car had disappeared. The afternoon sun began to decline, casting elongated shadows across the terrain. Somewhere, not too far from there, Sarah knew she was being watched. The question now was, how much time did she have before they tried again? Night fell over the ranch like a heavy cloak of expectations. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Mary's revelations. After her friend's departure, she spent hours studying the old plans, trying to decipher her husband's meticulous notes. The secret compartment under the house particularly intrigued her. According to the markings, there should be an entrance near the old pantry, a room that had served only as storage for years. Determined, Sarah maneuvered her chair there, turning on the dim light that revealed dusty shelves and stacked boxes. There must be something here, she murmured, examining every inch of the walls with attentive eyes. Her fingers slid over the exposed bricks, searching for any irregularity. Thunder outside began to neigh rhythmically, as if trying to get her attention. Sarah knew that sound well. It was the same the horse made when he found something important. Rolling to the pantry window, she observed the animal repeatedly stamping his hooves at a specific point in the yard. "What did you find, my friend?" she asked, more to herself than to the horse. Then she noticed the point where Thunder was stomping was aligned with a specific mark on the plan. Her husband had used external references to map the compartment. Turning her attention back to the pantry, Sarah began counting bricks from the corner, following the measurements indicated on the paper. Her fingers found a small protrusion, almost imperceptible, on the 12th brick. When she pressed lightly, she heard a soft click. A section of the wall, the size of a narrow door, moved inward a few inches. "Impossible," she whispered, her heart racing. With some effort, she managed to push the panel, revealing a dark passage. The air coming out was fresh, indicating some kind of ventilation. Sarah hesitated, aware of the risks, but the need to discover. The truth was stronger. She quickly returned to the living room, grabbing a powerful flashlight she kept for emergencies. Upon returning to the pantry, she found Thunder watching attentively through the window, as if standing guard. The passage was narrow, but her chair could pass with a few inches of clearance, something that Sarah realized couldn't be a coincidence. Her husband had planned this with her in mind. The tunnel extended for a few yards, gently sloping down. The walls were lined with concrete, showing no signs of infiltration. At the end of the slope was a small chamber, no larger than a common bathroom, and there, built into the wall, was a safe. Sarah felt her hands tremble as she typed in their wedding date, the combination her husband always used for important things. The safe opened with a metallic sigh, revealing its contents: a black-covered book, some folders, and a sealed envelope with her name on it. Before she could examine anything, a sound from above alerted her. Thunder had started to neigh more, intensely, his hooves beating hard on the ground. Someone was approaching the house. With quick movements, Sarah put everything in a bag she always carried on her chair. The envelope with her name she hid in her jacket pocket. She had barely closed the safe when she heard voices coming from the house. "It has to be somewhere." A deep male voice echoed through the passage. The old man wouldn't leave without keeping a record. Sarah recognized that voice. It was identical to the one she had heard in old recordings her husband kept. Dr. Harrison was in her house, with her heart pounding in her chest. She maneuvered her chair back through the tunnel, trying to make as little noise as possible. The book contains a specific code to contact someone who can help make this information public safely. Look for the page marked with our wedding date. The instructions are there. I'm sorry for involving you in all this, but knowing you as I do, I know you'll do the right thing. You've always been the strongest of us both, with all my love, Robert. Sarah let the pages rest in her lap, silent tears running down her face. So many years of unanswered questions, and now everything was starting to make sense. The frequent visits of Edward Harrison to the sheriff's office, the long nights Robert spent in his office, the mysterious phone calls. A soft neigh from Thunder brought her back to the present. The horse was standing near her window, as if understanding the importance of this moment. Sarah picked up the black-covered book she had rescued from the safe. It was time to discover exactly who they were fighting against. But before she could open it, a headlight cut through the darkness outside. An unfamiliar car was parking near the gate. By the silhouette, Sarah recognized the exact moment when James Harrison, the fake Jake, was getting out of the vehicle. He wasn't alone. Sarah acted quickly, storing the letter and book in her bag. She had only minutes before the intruders reached the house. Thunder was already on alert, his hooves beating rhythmically in a code only Sarah understood. She now realized each beat had a purpose. Robert had trained the horse to be more than a guardian. "We need to buy time," Sarah whispered, maneuvering her chair towards the pantry. Footsteps on the porch indicated the intruders were approaching. "Mrs. Thompson," James's voice called from outside. "We need to talk. We know you found something today. We can resolve this civilly." She didn't respond. Already inside the pantry, she quietly closed the door behind her. Through the small window, she could see Thunder strategically moving around the yard, keeping the intruders focused on the front of the house. "Let's go in," said a second voice, deeper and more authoritative. Sarah recognized the tone. It was Dr. Harrison. She must be in the bedroom. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Sarah had already activated the secret panel in the pantry, her chair sliding smoothly into the passage. This time, she closed the panel completely behind her. In the secret compartment, Sarah wasted no time. Following Robert's instructions, she located the second panel on the opposite wall. The mechanism was identical to the first, revealing a wider tunnel that extended into the darkness. Upstairs, she could hear the intruders ransacking the house. The sound of drawers being opened and furniture being moved came muffled through the walls. Then a loud neigh from Thunder, followed by a crash. "Dad!" James's voice sounded alarmed. "The horse knocked over the car." Sarah couldn't suppress a smile. Thunder was creating a distraction, exactly as Robert had planned. She turned on her flashlight and began advancing through the tunnel, her chair finding a surprisingly level path. The tunnel was an impressive work of engineering. The walls were reinforced, and there were regular markings indicating the direction. Robert had thought of everything, even installed small reflective arrows on the floor, visible only when illuminated. After what seemed like hours, but were probably only minutes, Sarah reached a metal ladder that went up vertically. Her heart sank. Her chair couldn't climb up there. That's when she noticed something familiar. Next to the ladder was a kind of manual elevator, similar to those Robert had installed at home after her accident. A crank allowed her to operate the mechanism herself. The distant sound of angry voices echoed through the tunnel. They had discovered the passage from the pantry. Sarah began her ascent in the elevator, each turn of the crank bringing her closer to the surface. When she reached the top, she found exactly what the letter promised. She was in the old Meadows barn. The place was abandoned, but an old motorcycle, covered by a tarp, caught her attention. Attached to it was a note in Mary's handwriting. "For emergencies, the key is under the mat." A distant boom reverberated through the tunnel. They were getting closer. Sarah knew she had to act fast. Her years as a riding instructor before the accident had given her experience with motorcycles, a skill she never imagined she'd need to use again. Adapting the controls to operate with her hands, Sarah started the motorcycle. The engine purred softly. Someone had kept the vehicle in perfect condition over all these years. Through the barn's half-open door, she could see the lights of Oakville in the distance. Somewhere in that direction, Mary was waiting with the next step of the plan Robert had devised so many years ago. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel was closer. Sarah accelerated the motorcycle towards the night, the book and letter secure in her bag. As she moved away, a familiar neigh cut through the air. Even miles away, thunder still maintained his faithful vigilance. The dirt road stretched out before her like a dark ribbon under the starry sky. Sarah knew this wasn't an escape, but the beginning of something bigger. The answers she sought were in the book she carried, and she was determined to honor Robert's legacy. The truth, kept secret for so long, would finally come to light. The city of Oakville slept as Sarah arrived on the outskirts. Mary waited at an abandoned gas station on the old highway, as arranged in the note left with the motorcycle. "Thank God you made it," Mary whispered, helping Sarah transfer to a wheelchair prepared next to an adapted van. As Mary stored the motorcycle, Sarah opened the black book. It was a coded diary, each entry carefully organized in a system only Robert knew. "He taught me part of the code years ago," Mary explained, starting the van. "But only a small part. He said when the time came, you'd know how to decipher the rest." Sarah flipped through the pages until she found the marking Robert mentioned in his letter, their wedding date. There, written in a mix of seemingly random numbers and letters, was a message that made her heart race. "It's a sequence of coordinates," Sarah murmured, her years as a math teacher proving useful. "And something else? It looks like a radio frequency." Mary nodded, driving carefully through the deserted streets. Robert maintained contact with an investigative journalist in New York, someone he trusted completely. The coordinates must lead to him. A high beam appeared in the rearview mirror, making both women hold their breath. But it was just a patrol. Sergeant Miller had fulfilled his part of the plan, ensuring they had a discreet escort. "How's Thunder?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "He's safe," Mary assured. "As soon as you entered the tunnel, he ran to the agreed meeting point. Robert's son in the mounted police is taking care of him." Sarah turned her attention back to the book, specifically to the marked page. Besides the code, there was a series of carefully pasted newspaper clippings, some dating back decades. Each seemed harmless in isolation, but together they told a story of corruption and power that spanned generations. "Edward was always ambitious," Mary commented as she drove towards the main highway. "But he was just a piece on the board. The real players are people who appear in social columns, who inaugurate hospitals, and make million-dollar donations to political campaigns." A distant thunder announced the approach of a storm. Sarah continued deciphering the code, each new discovery more surprising than the last. Robert had mapped not only current operations, but also their evolution over decades. Here, Sarah pointed to a specific entry. Robert discovered that the tunnels weren't just for transport. They built a listening network, taking advantage of the natural cavities in the terrain. They could intercept conversations in police stations, courts, even in political offices. Mary nodded gravely. That's why Dr. Harrison always seemed to be one step ahead. He had privileged information about any investigation before it even started. The van now followed the highway towards New York, the storm rapidly approaching. In the back seat, Sarah found a folder with recent documents, updates that Mary had collected over the years, following instructions left by Robert. "We need to reach the journalist before dawn," Mary said, checking the clock. Robert left specific instructions about the right moment to reveal all this. It has to be simultaneous. Newspapers, television, internet. Once the story starts circulating, it will be impossible to contain. Sarah took out her cell phone, dialing the radio frequency found in the code. It was an amateur radio transmission, seemingly innocuous. But every half hour between normal conversations, a specific sequence of numbers was transmitted. "It's a confirmation system," Mary explained. "The journalist transmits this code to inform that he's safe and ready to receive the information." Robert created an entire security network. A new set of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, this time approaching rapidly. Mary gripped the steering wheel tighter, but maintained a constant speed. "Don't worry," Sarah said, recognizing the light pattern. "It's another of Miller's patrol cars. He promised we'd have protection all the way to New York." As the storm finally reached the highway, Sarah couldn't help but think of Thunder, her faithful guardian. Somehow the horse had always known. Each alert neigh, each suspicious behavior in front of Jake had been his attempt to protect her. The book in her lap held secrets capable of changing the course of many lives. And now, finally, these secrets would come to light. Robert had always known this day would come. He had planned every detail, prepared every move like in an elaborate game of chess. The van continued through the rainy night, carrying not just two determined women, but also the weight of a long-buried truth. Somewhere ahead, a journalist waited to give voice to this story, and this time, no one could prevent it from being told. The sun was rising over New York when the van parked in front of a cafe in Brooklyn. Fernando Marx, a middle-aged journalist, greeted them at the side door. Inside, a makeshift newsroom bustled with activity. Fernando explained they were ready to publish as soon as Sarah gave the signal. Robert had built a network of trusted journalists over the years. Sarah opened the book on an illuminated table. Each code and seemingly trivial note was a piece of a larger mosaic. She pointed out entries mapping operations from the 1960s when the first tunnels were discovered during highway construction. Fernando typed rapidly, transforming each revelation into a clear, impactful narrative. Mary spread out recent documents she had collected. In recent years, they modernized everything. They're not just tunnels anymore. They're high-tech operation centers. Headlines began appearing on multiple computer screens. The story was leaking through various channels simultaneously, exactly as Robert had planned. Fernando's phone rang constantly. Journalists nationwide sought confirmation and more details. Robert's plan was working. Once the story started circulating, it would be impossible to contain. Fernando showed Sarah a folder of videos and audios. Robert installed recording systems at strategic points in the tunnels. Every meeting, every suspicious conversation, everything was recorded. Sarah watched some recordings, recognizing important voices and names. It was clear now. Dr. Harrison was just an intermediary in a much larger network. Police vehicles began discreetly positioning around the block. Miller had kept his promise. They would have protection until the end. "I just received information," said Fernando, checking his phone. "Edward Harrison is trying to leave the country, but airports have been alerted. The FBI has taken over the case." Mary smiled for the first time in many hours. Robert always said that truth is like water. It can be contained for a while, but it always finds a way. As the sun now shone fully over New York, its light reflecting off skyscrapers, Sarah couldn't help but think of Thunder, his mission fulfilled. And in newsrooms across the country, A story buried for decades was finally coming to life. Understood. I'll continue the story in a more concise manner while maintaining its quality and key details. The hours following the publication transformed the makeshift newsroom into a frenzied operations center. New information poured in as people began to speak out. Carlos Harrison Jr., attempting to flee, was arrested at an airport with incriminating files. Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension as revelations continued to surface. Robert's plan had worked better than anyone could have expected. "Mrs. Thompson," called Miller from the door. "I've received information about Thunder, the mounted. Police want to take him back now that everything's over." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "Thunder is family. His place is at the ranch, protecting our home as he always has." As night fell over New York, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The ranch, once small and isolated, now revealed its true importance. Every corner held a story. Each structure had a greater purpose than it appeared. Thunder's faithful vigil, Robert's meticulous planning, and the courage of those who fought in the shadows had finally brought the truth to light. Sarah knew that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where justice and truth would prevail. A week after the revelations, Sarah returned to the ranch. The property had changed. Police had removed surveillance equipment, and investigators were documenting the discovered tunnels. Thunder greeted her with a joyful neigh. The horse seemed lighter, as if sensing his special mission was complete. Sarah found a sealed metal box buried near the old maple tree. Inside were more documents, photos, and a USB drive. Most importantly, there was an envelope dated the day before Robert's accident. The letter revealed Robert's extensive network of honest police officers, judges, and prosecutors working in secret. He had transformed every obstacle into an opportunity. Even using Sarah's condition as camouflage, Sarah decided to turn part of the property into a community center, preserving the tunnels as a memorial. The ranch became a symbol of resistance and hope. 3 months later, the ranch was transformed. The old barn now housed a community library. Children played on well-maintained lawns, elderly gathered under the maple tree for chess, and student groups used new facilities for research. Thunder adapted perfectly to the new routine, allowing supervised rides for children. A school van arrived with the first group of students for a new educational program about citizenship, justice, and the importance of truth. As Sarah observed the bustling activity from her porch, she reflected on Robert's words. "Each person has a choice to make. We can bow to fear and intimidation, or we can stand firm, defending what's right." The ranch, once a point in a network of secrets, had become a beacon of hope and renewal. Sarah was ready to write the next chapter of this extraordinary story. Understood. I'll continue the story in a more concise manner, while maintaining its key elements and quality. The ranch became a hub of community activity and education. Sarah implemented programs on civic engagement and justice, honoring Robert's legacy. Thunder continued his role as a beloved guardian and attraction for visitors. National interest in the ranch's story grew. Journalists, researchers, and curious citizens visited to learn about the exposed corruption network and the power of individual action against injustice. Sarah worked with authorities to ensure all evidence was properly handled. The tunnels, now secure, became part of guided educational tours about local history and the importance of civic responsibility. As months passed, the impact of the revelations rippled through political and business circles. Several high-profile arrests were made, and legislative reforms were proposed to prevent similar corruption schemes. Sarah found herself thrust into a role as an unexpected public figure. She used this platform to advocate for transparency in government and support for whistleblowers. Thunder, now a local celebrity, continued his daily patrols. His presence served as a living reminder of the ranch's pivotal role in uncovering the truth. The ranch evolved into a symbol of hope and resilience, attracting people seeking inspiration and guidance in fighting corruption in their own communities. 1 year after the revelations, the ranch hosted a celebration. The first adult literacy class graduated, and Sergeant Miller's mentorship program introduced a new class of cadets. Sarah reflected on the transformation. The old pasture now housed a community garden, and the barn had become a state-of-the-art library. Fernando's book, now in its 5th edition, had inspired documentaries and special reports. Sarah received a letter from James Harrison, now aiding in prison rehabilitation programs. The celebration's highlight was the inauguration of a new wing, dedicated to memory and truth, displaying documents and artifacts that told the story of the ranch and those who contributed to its transformation. Sarah's closing speech emphasized how each revelation had built bridges rather than destroyed them. The ranch had become a beacon of hope, inspiring visitors to fight corruption in their own communities. As the sun set, Sarah made a final round of the property with thunder. The ranch, once a stage for secrets and conspiracies, now pulsed with life and possibilities. Sarah realized she finally understood what Robert meant when he said some stories need to be lived to be comprehended. The ranch had become a living testimony that truth, when embraced with courage and compassion, has the power to transform lives.